I call to order a meeting of the North Andover School Committee, May 6, 2015, and we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I would just remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded, and if you could make sure your cell phones are on vibrate, that would be great. So we will start with public comment for agenda items only. I don't know if there's any. Okay, so we'll proceed with recognition. Recognition?
Carla, sure. Carla's going to recognize a few teachers that have been accepted into some study program this summer. And as we talked about it 2 meetings ago with some other teachers, I think it's a great opportunity to recognize these teachers in public and to show, demonstrate all of the wonderful work that's going on in our schools. So, Carla?
Thank you for the opportunity. I have Mrs. Karen Rucker, who is our German teacher, and Mr. Bennett Ahern, who is a science teacher at the high school, mostly biology. And they applied for a Goethe Institute scholarship to study in Germany during the summer in German and STEM. So I'm going to let them come up and just talk to you a little bit about the program. They're very excited. This is a great opportunity, and we're hoping to have some interdisciplinary units next year between our freshman honors biology and our German program. So I'll let them talk a little bit about it.
Okay. Hello, I'm Karen Rucker, and
I'm Bennett Ahern.
and I got an email message from the Goethe Institute, which is the German Cultural Educational Government Outreach Program, to apply for this program. And they are typically very generous with scholarships, and I thought, hey, let's give it a try. And asked Bennett if he would like to apply for this and how we can combine and do cross-curricular design between German and science. So we wrote a letter. I wrote the letter in German. Bennett wrote his in English. Dr. Scazzarella wrote us a recommendation letter, and off it went, and next thing you know, we got it. So we're going to Saarland, which I've never been to before. It's a European technical institution in Otzenhausen, down near the French border, and it will be a 10-day educational trip. We'll be visiting German model schools, and we'll also be going to the Parliament in Luxembourg and in Brussels, and we hope to come back with lots of ideas to bring to the classroom. Want to talk about sustainability?
Sure. So I'm excited as well, just because the nature of the trip from a STEM perspective is to learn a little bit more about alternative energy, especially how it's used in Germany, which currently is leading Europe in sustainable energy. So it's a fantastic opportunity to learn a little bit more, come back and introduce that subject to my students, and perhaps even create some sort of project, a culminative thing at the end of the year for next year. So it could be a fantastic opportunity.
Great. Pretty exciting. So
Congratulations.
thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll report when we come back.
Yeah, please do.
Okay.
Excellent.
Thank you.
I just want to introduce my Chinese guest. As you may or may not know, the high school is hosting 10 students from China for the week. They are staying in 10 families' homes in North Andover and coming to school every day with our students. And this is Gloria. She's an English teacher in the school in China, and she's been hanging out with me, as well as some of the families have been very gracious and have invited her on a few outings also. So she's been at school every day, and unfortunately, when I took her to eat tonight, I said, your extra bonus is some time at the school board meeting. So here she is, and I'm really happy to have her at least meet you, and so you see that this program is moving along. And our kids, we're getting great reports from the families and the students about what a wonderful experience it's been just for this 1 week. So just wanted to let you know that.
Great, thank you. That's awesome. Very good. Okay. And because Dr. Scazzarella is here and we have a guest with her as well, if we could do item 9B, which is the first reading of the 2015-2016 North Andover High School overnight trips. That would be great if the committee doesn't object. Okay. Sorry, we put you back on the spot.
That's quite all right. I submitted the 3 exchange trips for next year. They are, for the most part, the same experience that our students have had for a number of years in each of the languages. The only difference is the Spanish exchange would like to go in February instead of April, so that 2 different teachers would have the ability to go, that coach in the spring. They'd like to be able to go. And the school in Spain and the company that the Spanish teachers rely on is very okay with them going in February. The Spanish students will still come in the fall, as they always do, but our kids will go a little sooner. So those 3 trips are here. I also brought the Shakespeare Festival, which is something we've participated in for over 20 years. It's typically the week before Thanksgiving. For students leave on Friday around noonish and come back on Sunday night. They miss half a day of classes. They fundraise, and there's a minimal cost to that for the students. The trip that's new is the request from my International Thought teachers and students, potential students for next year, to be able to go on a service trip to the Dominican Republic. So I have one of the International Thought teachers is here this evening, Christy Morley, to talk with you, and we have 2 students who would like to talk to you about why they think this is a valuable experience for them to have. So I'm going to introduce Christy, Megan and Melissa.
Hello, I'm Christy Morley, one of the English teachers at the high school. I co-teach International Thought for seniors with Andy Van Horn, who is one of the history teachers at the high school. The course itself, we've found over the last couple of years that at the end of that senior year, we do a humanitarian unit. So we talk about all of the past conflicts, we talk about the history of religion, we talk about all of the very serious issues going on around the world. And lately we've been focusing on the Middle East a lot as the current theater of conflict. But the students, when they get to the humanitarian unit, we focus on the power of the individual. So as they leave the high school, building off of Ray's and the values that they've been working on since they were in elementary school, what can they do as an individual, whether they are a computer programmer, whether they want to be a teacher, whether they want to be a community leader, whether they want to be in business, what can they do as an individual? We've brought in various guest speakers throughout the year, so we've started a guest speaking unit to help them connect with the world outside of North Andover. So we've had a World War II veteran come in, we've had a retired FBI agent come in, we've had several other professionals from around the world. And the one thing we feel is missing is getting them out of the classroom and into the world to get that perspective. They've heard it from us, now they've heard it from other people who have been there. We want to give the students an opportunity to go someplace and gain that perspective. So we hooked up with EF Tours, and I believe you all have the proposal there for the trip. I have 2 students here who are actually current seniors. They're in International Thought. And when I was bouncing the idea off of them, they were very passionate about the idea. And it's almost cruel that I'm making them do this. But they are going to speak to you a little bit about why they would have loved to go on this trip. Would have been a wonderful trip. And now that they've been through the course, they're only weeks away from graduation and their final project, how it connects to the things that they've been learning throughout the year.
Hi, I'm Melissa Thomas.
I'm Megan Monroe.
And we just want to say thank you for hearing us out today, and thank you for inviting us to be here to speak to our wonderful proposal. Megan?
So our unit question has changed throughout our trimesters, and overall it's just about how we as a, I don't know how to word it.
As a global community. How we can all work together. And I really feel like if we had the opportunity to go on this trip, because we're seniors, we would have really had a better understanding of how the global community works and how we can, as individuals, help out others and kind of you take over. I'll take over from here. The course itself, International Thought.
I'm not good at this.
You're doing great.
really good. The course itself, International Thought, we just wanted to give you a little bit of background, is pretty much a building step into seniors' lives to pretty much broaden our horizons and pretty much broaden our scope of view into the world today and the 21st century. So this is pretty much the building blocks for us being out in the real world. Now, I'm sure Ms. Morley and Mr. Van Horn, if he was here, could speak to this. Our first trimester unit, we talked mostly about perspective and our individual perspective of the real world and the global community as we see it through our own eyes and how others view it through their own eyes. And we've been talking about, just going off of that, just kind of like the building blocks into making a better community for the universal world. And I think just from talking about it, having multiple speakers come in and just give us their perspective, well, we've seen what they could do. Well, why can't we do it? Why can't we go out and have this great opportunity to go into the world and make a difference?
And then last trimester, our unit question was, does human nature make conflict inevitable? And I think we can all agree that part of human nature is we have our own perspectives on things, because not the same thing happens in America as it does in, say, the Dominican Republic. And having the opportunity to go and see other people's perspectives on certain matters, or like their technology or their education, that would really help to kind of minimize the different perspectives, and we can get a feel for how other people see things, which would help to minimize conflict.
And that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for coming.
I'd be happy to answer any questions if you have them about the trip.
Any questions, Mr. Lippert, or?
Just a couple, kind of innocuous questions. Of all the places you could have gone, why the Dominican Republic? I'm just interested.
So when we went through EF looking through, I felt very strongly that I wanted to do a service trip. They do offer other educational tours where you're doing, tourist things, where you're going around seeing museums and experiencing different cities. I felt very strongly I wanted to do a service trip because not only as an International Thought teacher, but also as a member of the advisory committee at the high school, where we're working to bring Raise to the high school and get the kids to buy into a lot of those values as high school students. I wanted to make sure it was a service trip. There are only certain locations where they do service trips.
Okay.
Some of them, the Dominican Republic seemed to me the most palatable as our introductory trip as far as a location. I didn't want to kick it off with a trip to Cambodia or to India or any.
Well, yeah, good choice.
I'd love to in the
Good
future,
choice.
but
Yeah,
not
yeah.
for the first one.
Yeah,
Get
yeah.
one under our belt.
Right, exactly. I said it's a cruise destination, so I think it might be a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, what is the service involved that the students will do?
So the tricky part about that is we would be working with different NGOs. One of the ones that's very present in the Dominican Republic is the Mariposa Foundation, which is a very well-known NGO. They can't tell us our specific project until closer to the trip because there are other groups going throughout the year, and it really depends on how much progress they make. We would be doing anything from digging trenches for clean water to building athletic facilities, to building schools, to tutoring children, to having discussions with young girls about women's rights. So wherever they are in their progress, they would give us a project. And I was told they would notify us about a month or two in advance of a better idea of exactly what we would be asked to do.
And what are going to be the living arrangements for the students?
So within, I believe in the packet you got, there was an example of the 3 places that we would be staying, and the students would stay together, much like the other trips, 3 or 4 students to a room. They would have a private bathroom. We do have a tour guide who is bilingual with us 24/7. They don't leave our side. And they would provide all meals for the students as well. And we'd be transported by EF-approved buses.
And how is this going to be funded? Question.
So this is one that the students would pay for themselves. There is a payment plan. So the nice part is that we, as myself as a teacher and the school, we don't see any of the money. The parents or the students would go on a website and they actually pay EF directly for the tour. They can set up a payment plan. They also allow for fundraising. So I've been in talks with our coordinator at EF to brainstorm different ideas for how the students could fundraise some money. And looking forward, they do offer, for this trip, if we got, 18 students to go on this trip, and this one's capped at 25, the service trips, they cap it, then I would be given a scholarship that if we were to do it again, I could give that scholarship to a student or break the scholarship up to other students in following years.
And the chaperones, will they pay their own way too?
So the way that it works, for every 6 students who sign up, you get a free chaperone.
Okay.
So it would be, a minimum of 12, Andy and myself, and they cap it at 25, so we would possibly have a 3rd or a 4th chaperone.
Good answers.
At what point in the school year do you pick the students, or do they volunteer to go on it? How does that actually work? Because you probably need to give them some time to fundraise.
So they are hoping, it's very time sensitive, they would like us to do that. We're all sort of set up and ready to hit the ground running if it goes through. So we've already collected nominations from teachers of names that if this trip were to happen, who would they nominate? And we have over 160 names. We would send nomination letters. They print up personalized nomination letters. We would do students that are enrolled or have requested to be enrolled in International Thought, because really we want any student who's interested in this experience. We would also offer it to students who are in our Interact Club, because that's about 60 students who have already done a lot of work in the North Andover community on different service projects. And then we've collected nominations for the rest of the students. We would have a parent information meeting at night where an EF representative would come and present all this information to the parents.
That'd be in the fall?
That would happen next week if we did it.
Oh.
So it's very quick to give them as much time for a
Yeah.
payment plan as possible and to fundraise as possible. He's ready to come in next week at night and have a parent meeting. And then they sign up online right away. And it's first come, first serve of those nominated students. Oh, yes, thank you, important detail. One thing that makes this much less stressful is that if there were an international event or a travel advisory or something were to come up, everything is fully refundable. They have a guarantee that we can change our dates, we can change our location. So say if something happened and all of a sudden our government's saying do not go to the Dominican Republic, it's not safe, I can contact them and say, switch us. We want to go to Costa Rica, or we want to go, let's, take their money and apply it to a trip to someplace in Europe that's safe, where they'll still have an international experience, and they will do that free of charge. And and there's a $15 million liability insurance policy, so if anything happens, everything is covered by EF.
So if you did have to switch it, would there be a cost difference to families?
No.
Okay.
No, once they sign up, they are locked into that price that they pay.
Mr. Gross? Oh, I'm sorry, were you done? Okay.
Just echoing on I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. They also guaranteed that they know we need a second reading from the school committee and approval, so even though we might be meeting next week, everything that might be said or collected a deposit would be completely returnable also, in case you said no. I just wanted to make that clear. We didn't
I do have a signed letter from EF that if for some reason it did not get approved, the kids would get all their money back if they had signed up.
Please.
So let's say the trip had to get switched because of international issues. If you decided that you didn't want to continue, is there a time limit to when things can be refunded, or is it up until the date of the trip?
My understanding is that it's up until 45 days before the trip they can be refunded. And I believe that if it's within 45 days, they will get a travel voucher. So
That's what the brochure says.
yes.
So if I could ask a couple of quick questions. I think I'm just echoing from Mr. Limpert, the description of the service is very vague in the brochure. Is it possible to get more substantive examples of service that others have done other than digging trenches? So it'd be, I think, helpful to get some examples of that, since it is, I think, the center of the activity.
Yes. So the examples that the representative gave me when I asked was because we were talking about different locations, he said to me, if you had chosen Costa Rica, I could tell you that you'd be doing a lot of discussions and tutoring, because we've been present in Costa Rica for a long time. Most of our, facilities are built. Most of those things are done, and now we're in need of human interaction with the tutoring and things like that. Because the Dominican Republic they have not been present there for as long, my understanding that we would be doing a little bit more physical labor of actually putting some of those things in place. But again, and until we're approved, they're not going to put us on the schedule for things. So I could ask that perhaps after we're after this first meeting. Yeah.
Are you spending 12 hours in the sun digging trenches, or what does that look like?
And they have a meeting in the morning, so they do a meeting in the morning, and then we would meet with different members of the community who are there, and the kids could have conversations where they're really immersed in the culture with different families in the community, and they do a lot of work with the children in the community. And then they go back at night, and they do have reflective journals, and they do a lot of reflective discussions where they talk about what went on during the day and connect it to things that they've been doing in school. And there's also an opportunity called the We Share program, where they are fully accredited, so students can actually earn college and high school credit by doing coursework before they leave and when they come back, or doing a research project on the ground and producing a research product when they get back.
Good.
Have you given any thought to, since you've had so many students indicate an interest in doing this, have you given any thought to just using a straight, like a lottery to do this, rather than the first come, first served thing? Would that seem more fair to people if it was just a straight lottery?
Well, I think they're doing a nomination and then kind of running it through from there.
Yeah.
Well, what she said was first come, first served from the nomination list. That's what it sounded like.
That's what we can do. It depends on how many people show up at the parent information night. So they give a rough estimate, sort of like planning a wedding. They give a rough estimate of, it really is. He says, he was telling me, if you can get 150 names of students, then we know that you'll get about 30 students and their parents at the parent meeting. So when they go through those, in their experience, those are the numbers that you get. And then hopefully if you get those 30, or even, if we get 23, then it's 23. So we don't know yet if we would have to do any sort of selection. We did talk about doing a lottery system, so that it is a possibility. It's just the kids are all excited about it. I'm not quite sure how many parents will actually sign up for it.
Let me see now if I understand. So you got 160 nominations.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to send out letters to the 160 students, and some number of them and their parents will show up.
Correct.
And that's sort of the self-selection process.
Correct.
At that point. So if 25 showed up, you'd be in perfect shape, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Got it.
I have two more questions. This is, I think, one of the most costly trips that we've done.
Yes.
And I see that there's some money available for scholarships. Is that out of the school, or is that out of the tour company? Do we know?
So that would be, out of the fundraising. So I think what Dr. Scazzaro was talking about with that piece in the proposal is that students have the opportunity to do fundraising through the school. So we would brainstorm with them, and then with that, they also have, in talking to the coordinator, she had actually gone on one in high school, and she said that, she went through and she was able to send out letters to get people to pledge money for her to go, and then she was doing one of the projects and presented it to all of the people, that had pledged money for her to go and have this experience. So we would coach them through. Any students who sign up, I would be more than willing to work with them on fundraising opportunities. The scholarships would happen after, if we did the first trip. Then depending how many students sign up, we would be given a fund for a following trip to be able to, give scholarship to a student or two, yeah.
Okay, and the other question I had is, I think this is the first tour we've done with this company?
As far as I know, it is, yes.
Do we have any experience from other schools that have used them that we might be able to vet the great glowing reviews?
Yes, I know. I just actually found out this week that Masconomet just sent a group of students to England for a tour with them. They do work with, they actually had They do leadership conferences, which is another thing I was interested in possibly for the future, is they do a peer leadership conference around the world. And the name is going to escape me, but and I can find out and email them. Another local school had a group of students that actually got to sit down, and they were the guests of honor at the leadership conference.
So I would propose to you it's going to be a slightly different experience going to England for leadership conference and going to send,
Correct, yes.
in the Caribbean for, a service event. Thank you.
Yes.
It might be helpful to get some experience with other schools that have done this trip to see what they liked, what they didn't like, just so that we have some other non-biased opinion to.
I did have a conversation with a student today who had gone on almost exactly the same trip with her mother is a nurse, and they went on a medical mission trip, and she and another girl who are North Andover students had gone this past February. I have to ask, she couldn't remember if it was this company, but when I showed her the itinerary, she said those are the exact places we went to. And she said it was unbelievable, and she said that, as a side note, one of the things her mother had said to her was, I can't believe that your school doesn't offer anything like this. And I found it, I said, well, hopefully. We do.
Great. Thank you.
So I just have two quick things. I mean, first, I'm a returned Peace Corps volunteer.
Awesome.
And this is exactly the type of class that I would have loved, I won't say how many years, but for my high school to have offered back then, and this kind of trip. I think it's just absolutely so important for students to kind of see what's out there in the world. And, you always kind of hear, or it's anecdotal, but when you're living it and you understand that, that's how people get their water, and that's what it takes in order to, you appreciate and you understand exactly what we have in this country, and I think that this is just absolutely fantastic. My only concern, and I'm just going to echo a little bit with Mr. Gross, is that it's just an expensive trip.
Right.
And it's, roughly $1,000 than our second most expensive trip. So I would just be curious after the informational night, and I think our next meeting is the 28th. I'll be curious if we can maybe just get a little bit of feedback how the parents kind of responded to that, because it's $3,400 almost, and I'm wondering if that it all sounds great when the kids are looking at the brochures, but when mom and dad kind of see the sticker price at the end, if that really kind of drops that off. And I don't want this to necessarily become something that only certain kids in our town can afford to do.
Right.
But I think it's great, and I really thank you and Mr. Van Horn for kind of reaching and investigating out kind of what program would complement the class as well as I think this does. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks,
All right.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yeah.
I just want to thank all the teachers who are here tonight for putting forward all this effort to offer a new trip, a new opportunity for our students, and certainly professional development for you, but obviously a huge impact on our students. So I know it takes a lot of time and effort beyond the normal school day, so thank you.
Thank you. All right. So there's no students tonight? Nope. So, right. So we'll jump into the consent agenda. There are two. There are regular session minutes. Sorry. And there are, sorry, I'm on the wrong tab here, and executive session minutes. And just quickly for kind of everybody here, the executive session minutes were ones that I think were just inadvertently left off the packet that we approved, I'm going to say either 1 or 2 meetings ago. Okay. So I think I'd like to do each of them separately. And the first one, I think they're in reverse order in our packets, but if we wanted to...
So you want B first?
Yeah, we'll do them in the order that they're in the packet, so we'll do B.
Do you want to take the dates separately or take the executive session together?
I would leave that up to whoever making the motion.
All right, we'll move to approve and release executive session minutes from April 17, 2014, June 5th, 2014, and June 19, 2014, as presented in the packet.
All right, is there a second?
Second?
All right, any discussion?
So I'm just recalling the board membership back then. If I recall, Mr. Limpert was chair.
Correct.
And Ms. Berzloff, who obviously is no longer on the board, won't be voting on the release of these minutes, but I think we do have at least a majority that can vote on this.
I can vote on it. I was the chair.
You were the chair, right?
Okay.
Okay.
The updates or corrections?
I'll be abstaining, I wasn't on the board.
Okay. Anything else? All right, so all in favor of approving the minutes for, let me just make sure I state the dates correctly, April 17th, June 5th, and June 19th, 2014, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed and abstain?
Abstain.
Mr. Teresi abstaining. Okay, so we will jump on to the minutes from April 9th, 2015.
So move to approve as presented in the minutes, and the packet, the minutes of April 19, 2015.
Sorry.
Second.
Sorry, I should have asked for a second. I was trying to find it in the packet, but it switched over. Okay. Any discussion? All right, seeing no discussion, I will ask for all in favor to signify by saying aye. Aye. Sounded like it was unanimous, no noes or abstentions. All right, so 5-0. All right. We'll jump onto the chairman's report. I will be relatively brief tonight. This week is National Teacher Appreciation Week, so I thought that's where you were going with that, although it may have... All right, I appreciate that. So I just again want to thank all of our teachers and faculty and staff who support the students every day, and I know a lot of the schools and the PTOs are doing different things to show their appreciation this week, whether it's bringing in lunch or snacks or something for the teachers' room to show their appreciation. So again, I just want to say thank you to all of them. Today was Walk to School Day, so always a busier traffic day, oddly enough, of people driving to a safe location for dropping off their kids. I know we met at the Common this morning, and my kids say it's their most favorite day because they get to walk to school as opposed to having to take the bus. So I'm glad to know it was safe, and I haven't heard any complaints. Everybody seems pretty excited. Okay, so that is all I have for the chairman's report. So we will proceed to superintendent's report.
Well, I'd like also to reiterate the recognition of our teachers. Also, it's National Nurses Day.
That's right.
We sent congratulations to all of them, and I'd like also to recognize the appreciation that all staff feel from the PTOs that really put out some unbelievable spreads to recognize our staff members, and it is very, very much appreciated, and something actually people look forward to every year. It's typically a very fun event. I'd also, I just returned last week from a trip to Africa, Rwanda, and I simply mention it because it's interesting. I was talking with Christy and the students before the meeting, and it's very interesting. The more countries you go to, Brian can verify this because I think he's the record holder, but aside from the adjustment of my stomach, it's really fascinating to see how other countries work. I spent a day at a school. A friend of mine there is working in an independent school. It's a predominantly native population enrolled in the school. It's a pre-K to 12 school. Ended up giving a workshop to the paraprofessionals there. It's not all that different, the concerns they had and the questions they had from what I would have fielded if I were doing something here. But it's very much appreciated. They very much appreciate that different perspective, and it's always lesson to be learned is listen to what they want to hear about, because you're in somebody else's territory, and it's fascinating just to watch the kids. They are no different than our kids in school. School was class size was around 23 to 25 in that school, much more crowded in the classroom, though. Interesting enough, they teach in English and French. They do not teach the native language in school. Everybody speaks it, but they don't teach the language. And actually, this particular school in 7th grade, they also had German. So it's really complicating their lives. I also visited an international school that my friend's daughter also goes to. Very, very different experience than the other school, but it's always good. And as I drove around the country, all the schools are very recognizable because they build them all the same way. The beauty of it is there's no air conditioning necessary, nor is there any heat necessary, and therefore everything's pretty much open to the public. And the school the first school I went to had an early childhood center that I told Mary Lou would compete with ours. It was a thing of beauty, and there were 400 kids in it. But it was a fascinating experience, and I typically let people know I've done this, and if they want me to come in and talk to the kids, the classrooms, etc., I'm very willing to do it because I think it's very important to share perspectives, as the students mentioned tonight, about what goes on in other countries. So, enough about Africa. Now I'd like to call on Mr. Gilligan to talk about the coordinated program review. We presented some findings of the coordinated program review earlier this year, but the ELL section had not been completed by the state yet. So Gilly has some information to share with you.
As you guys, if you can recall back to the fall, we spoke about the coordinated program review, and we talked, we gave some examples and talked a little bit about civil rights, and along with special education, and the ELL folks have been backed up quite a bit across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts because they've been conducting reviews all over with a lot of pressure from Washington, D.C. and the Department of Justice. So a little bit about the ELL corrective action plan. The CPR, they evaluate 18 criteria areas in ELL. As with special ed and civil rights, we're required to submit documents to DESE concerning all ELL programming and submit any changes or a corrective action plan that they ask for. We have to be in compliance with what they're looking for by next December 8th. So they do give you time. If you can recall back to the civil rights as well as the special education, we did run into some very similar situations around policy, around wording and procedures. You guys voted several policies in over the course of the fall, and space is always traditionally an issue, making sure we have appropriate space for folks. So as we go through, I want to give you a few examples of areas around ELL, and several of the criteria areas where we needed to work on. It's things that we had done, but it wasn't systemic, and a lot of it had to do with translation to the appropriate languages as needed based on home language surveys. So, if you take a look at the example of ELE3, initial identification, the district does not consistently screen incoming students using a home language survey. That's something that we had to redefine, make sure we had all the appropriate areas, and provide the appropriate services as necessary. So it's been created. It's an online. There's help as needed, depending on what you check off. The ELL coordinator, at the time the parents register, is available, and it's a time where we record all of the baseline testing on these folks, which is terrific to get that information up front. Parent involvement. This had a lot to do with translation as well. Develop ways for the ELL students pertaining to their children, encouraging them to attend events or participate in school-based or, PACs or the PTO or school council. So much like special education had to do the same thing, we've coordinated for translation as needed. depending on the home survey. So using folks for meetings, for different things as we need to translate, and also translating documents. As we found out, we thought at first Google Translate might be beneficial, and we found out really quick that that wasn't so helpful as we thought. So, you know, we're submitting evidence about the different flyers, activities, translated in major languages as needed based on the home survey. And a records review indicated that we didn't contain all the required documentation has been updated by recent policies. And one of the nice things that we did, if you could, I had to kind of double-side this and go with the big paper. These are all the things that are required by DESC on all of our students. We had kept files on all of them, and we're now in compliance, you know, collecting all of the different information as required. And one of the nice things is, working with Alicia Murray, our data specialist, we were able to set up the registration so that as a parent fills it out, it pre-populates several of these fields, as well as it gives us the ability for each tutor now to make sure that we have the appropriate documentation to be reviewed and used to track progress, but also when the state comes back. And they're coming back to take a look at a couple spaces on December. That's next year. This year. They're coming back in May. I think it's the 18th. That a representative from the Coordinated Program Review will be coming over. She's been very helpful, and as we go, you know, we take advice from them. They answer the phone, they're helpful, and it's really about getting into compliance with the most current policy, the most current procedures. And, you know, the bottom line is, when you talk about ELL learners, we got to make sure we're doing everything we can to do it right, to get those kids where they are, make progress, and move them forward. It's about what's best for them. But there is a lot of red tape, as you can see. And on the back, although there's no students listed, this is just an example, and this is an actual example of the different languages in one of our schools. We're a very low incidence district, by the way. You know, some, you know, cities or towns have much higher percent of ELL learners. We only have maybe, the majority of the kids are in 2 elementary schools in town. The high school, I think, has 4 ELL learners at this time. The middle school, I think, is about 5 or 6. And then the majority are at the Thompson and the Atkinson School. And this was just an example of the different languages they speak and the folks that they work with.
One school?
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, you know, as we move forward, we really just have to continue to make progress. The great thing is, if there's something off, they send us another date and say, could you submit evidence by this time? So I'm looking forward to Dixie Diamond from DESE. She is our reviewer. She'll be out on May 18th. She's been extremely helpful, and we're looking forward to any other advice or recommendations they have so that we come in compliance as a low incidence district.
One of the things to point out perhaps that you might not understand is on that student record sheet there, where it says FLEP, that stands for Former English Language Learner, so that students actually flip out instead of flipping out because of testing. So you might wonder why the numbers are so low at the high school level or at the middle school level. It's because students are learning the language, and or they've been somewhere else where they've learned the language. We typically don't take in so many that aren't able to speak the language at a higher level because they've also been in. So, but when they're younger, it's much more challenging for them, and they learn so quickly.
They pick it up so quickly. Yeah. That's a great point, because I was thinking back when we first delved into this, and I was thinking, what happened to all those kids at the Thompson? Where did they end up? And the great news is they made such great progress that they were able to test out.
So is our intake form localized, or do they have to read English to answer the questions?
It's a real basic language piece where you have an option, and anyone that has that, we make the ELL coordinator available to assist.
Okay.
And once we have that, then we move forward from there. Because you can't possibly even, you can't possibly translate into every language there is. It
Right,
would be cost
especially
prohibitive. So
some of
we
these,
want to
right.
find out exactly what we need to do and do it.
So I'm just curious, the intake process is done in partnership with the ELL coordinator?
Yes.
Okay.
I don't recall, did you give us a copy of the full coordinated program review document? Did we get a full?
We did.
We got civil rights.
Could we, if
Sure,
we did, I
absolutely,
forgot.
sure.
The reason why I ask is because, we saw number 3, number 7, and number 18. I'm just wondering what goes between all of that and what
Yeah,
that
I
looks
mean-
like.
Oh, on this one we haven't, but yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there were other sections. There was the civil rights section.
Yep.
And so I think it'd be helpful just to go over that one
Sure,
more time and
absolutely.
just see what it looks like. So, now, even though a student may test out, what is our requirement to provide translation services for their family who may not be able to test
Yeah,
out?
they're required.
Yeah, but I mean, how does that work? As required or?
It's required or requested.
Okay.
I mean, required means we know we have to provide it in certain instances. Requested, for instance, if they were to come to a meeting with the student, they can
Okay.
request to have a translator there.
Interesting. Okay.
So when we meet with them on the 18th, that's more like a status.
Yeah, this ELL is really in progress, so you're seeing it, this is live. I mean, we have to December 8th, I believe it's December 8th of 2015.
Yep.
So we're really working in conjunction with them. Dixie Diamond has been out, I think, we spent a whole day with her, actually, a few months ago, checking out different things. And that, a lot of that had to do with just, as policy changed around transgender awareness and all those various different policies, and as well as space. We're crunched for space. For example, at the Kittredge, I like to call it the ground level and not the basement, downstairs. And they see it a little differently sometimes at DESC. We have regular classrooms down there, library, different things, and a lot of times it's a crunch for space. I can tell you at the Atkinson, we had a really great space for our ELL learners, but for whatever particular reason, they can find one space suitable at a particular school, and at this one, boy, no matter what we did, this space was not going to be appropriate according to them, although we thought it was a good space. So then we had to find an additional space, which over break we had to have some movement of, not the big staff classrooms, obviously, but we had to look at what's available in this area at this time. We had to actually look at teacher schedules so that we have appropriate spaces. So it's around that. I can tell you, since I took over at Thompson 7 years ago when I started there, we were so crowded that, ELL services were in the hallway with a divider. And now, everyone's got a home. It's not always the most ideal, but I got to say that Jim Mealy and the staff that has helped create and repurpose some spaces has done a really nice job.
Sound good?
All right. Thank you, gentlemen.
You didn't want to say anything about Ms. Marks, did you? Or is that not?
Oh, sure, I'd be glad to.
Just saying, right?
Sure, yeah. Gee, some things I just take for granted at a period of time. We did go through a interviewing process for replacement for Mary Gregoire, for humanities coordinator. Gilly led the initial search committee, and then the finalists came to the central office. Dr. Price, myself, Gilly, Jim were in on those interviews, and we selected Laureen Marks as the next, as the K-12 coordinator. And so subsequently, we've advertised, we sent letters to the and the teachers. I am meeting with the teachers and the school community next Tuesday night for input. We've asked them to volunteer to be on committee. We met with Dr. Price, talked it over about the timeline and the different scenarios. And we felt very strongly that we have enough time remaining in the school year to be able to run a full search based on our previous experiences doing it. So that, and if in the end there's not an appropriate choice, we still have time then to put in place, if necessary, an interim. But there's, according to the timeline, we should have finalist interviews completed around June 18th. All right, and then there'd be plenty of time to then name the person and start the person sometime early July. Ms. Marks, fortunate is that Ms. Marks will be in the district, and she will do plenty of the work and also assist in the transition with the new principal.
So
Sorry, Stan, I can't remember if I sent that out to you or not.
Yeah, well, I was thinking of, but I was thinking of it more for the public, so the folks at home might know, but.
Would there be an opportunity perhaps for that new principal to come in before the end of the school year? I mean, it sounds like they may meet at the 6th, they may do a selection on the 16th or something, and school ends on the 23rd, or just...
We have the person, we have in the process to be able to have the person spend all the finalists spend a half a day at the school.
Okay.
All right, so that's the
Just
way
kinda
we
want them
built
to
in
see it
the
in
process.
action and
They're going to
all
see it
that.
in
Okay.
action. Yes.
So what role will Dr. Price have in that process, if any?
A very strong role
Okay.
in that process. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. And again, congratulations to Mrs. Marks. So we were on track, and you got us off, or Gilly, I guess.
Well, that concludes the superintendent's report, more than I had planned for.
All right. So we'll jump into old business, and we have the second reading approval of a school choice participation for 2015-2016. Just to give a quick update, we had discussed this last week. We had the opportunity for a public forum. We didn't actually have public for that. But every year we're required to vote whether or not we will allow students outside of North Andover residents to come to North Andover on a tuition basis. And so the recommendation is to not participate in it again this year, in part due to student enrollment numbers, space constraints, and just, I hate to say, kind of none of our neighboring communities do that, and so it's not something that tends to be done, although it still is a requirement. So,
Mr. Chair, move to recommend North Andover Public Schools not participate in receiving district in the school choice program for 2015-2016 due to student enrollment numbers and space constraints.
Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion?
Discussion?
Have we received any communication for or against this from the public?
I have received nothing. I don't know.
I have received nothing. We have no participation in the public hearing, so, okay, thank you.
All right. So
We do at times find a request that if we have it or not, but that's from people outside our community.
Right, but our
Yeah.
community is not, obviously not interested either way. Or they agree with the decision. Okay, thank you.
All right. If there's no additional discussion, I will call the vote for approving, or I guess approving that we do not participate in the school choice for the 2015-2016 year. Signify by saying aye. 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 And it doesn't sound like there are any no's, so we'll go 5-0 on that. All right, so we will go into 8B, which is a second reading approval of the proposed changes to policy FF, and which is the naming of new facilities, and FFR, which is the procedures for naming new procedures. In your packet, there is the first piece, which is FF, and that is redlined, and we discussed that last week, and then it actually, the FFR was sent under a separate cover after that. So I would recommend that we...
You mind if we take them separately?
I was just going to say, I would recommend that we take them separately. I think that may be easier for discussion.
So move to approve as presented the revisions to policy FF, naming new facilities, as presented in the packet.
Is there a second?
School facilities.
New school facilities.
No, new is crossed out.
That's what's in the packet.
Oh, really?
Well, it's
New
in the packet, in the
facilities.
title, it's crossed out, but then down below in the,
Oh, right. The policy actually says
regarding you.
naming school facilities.
maybe the
Right, the
third
packet
paragraph
does
is-
say
We
new.
haven't approved that yet, so today it says new facilities.
Well, maybe it means that.
Oh.
Is the third packet, or the third paragraph specific, well,
It's okay.
referring to the new ones
I think
versus
it's
regular?
simple. Until we approve this, it's still called the new facilities process.
Yep.
Right.
So it's unambiguous.
This is the latest one.
This one's live, the latest.
Okay.
They have it, we have it.
Okay.
All right. So I think Mrs. Warren had a question on, obviously, the title of the policy is being recommended to change to naming school facilities, and then the third paragraph says regarding new school facilities. So I think that
Is specific.
is getting it more specific into. Okay. Any other questions or debate?
Mr. McDevitt?
Yes.
I just want to reiterate what I said last week, that I commend the effort you put into this. You've spent a lot of time with me personally. I'm sure you spent a lot of time with other members as well. Had some disagreements about it, but I think this, both, I know we're going to get to FFR in a second, but both policies reflect a spirit of compromise and a willingness to come to some kind of agreement on this. So I thank you for your efforts on that, and I will be voting in favor of both of these.
Any other? All right.
So,
So we're just doing
this
FF
one
now.
first, sorry, okay.
Okay. So if there's no additional discussion, the motion was to approve policy FF as presented in the package. Signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Didn't sound like there were any no's, so FF is approved. I will,
Call the right name.
I'm sorry?
Now we can call it by the right name.
Now we can call it by the right name, right. So the second piece was the actual procedure for the naming of facilities, which is policy FFR.
So move to approve as presented in the packet, procedure FFR for naming facilities.
And is there a second? Second. Mr. Teresi with a second. So we'll open it up for discussion. Just very quickly, we debated this at a pretty good amount last week, and there were some pretty good recommendations. There was, I think a desire for this to really kind of be the school committee's decision, and there was a desire for there to still be process involved in it and steps within that. So I tried to take the best opportunity that I could, and given the short window between our meetings, and then just draft something up. So I'm not saying it's perfect, I'm just saying this is kind of based upon the conversation, this is where I ended up, so.
I would echo Mr. Teresa's comment. I think based on our discussion at last meeting, which I thought was good, this is a nice kind of middle ground that you've done here for us. So I agree with Mr. Teresi. I think this is certainly a supportable procedure.
Yeah. The only comment I would have is, do we really need two procedures, one for buildings and one for facilities or existing facilities? But as you've separated out, I think this is rational, and we could certainly move that forward if we didn't
I
need
would
it.
say yes,
Well, I
personally.
wonder too, though, we refer to it only as facilities in FF, but then we bring up buildings, which is a new concept in FFR. So are we talking about new facilities?
I see your point. Okay, so I don't know if can you edit in there as well? I don't know. Are you in PDF or are you in the Word? Okay. So.
If you want to amend the motion, that's certainly doable.
So I think what Mrs. Warren is saying, and I if I can just take a moment here, the first bullet, or not bullet, but heading is new building, should probably be new facilities, and the second line is new school, a new school facility.
To be consistent.
Okay,
To be consistent.
Let's go back to the discussion Ms. Warren missed. Is a new facility a gymnasium? No. Is that a new facility? What we were trying to differentiate was building an entire school, which has one naming requirement, the point Mr. Teresi brought up, which we do very rarely, or naming parts of a school, which we could do more frequently. And so that's why in our discussion, we ended up with this statement here about buildings versus facilities. Now, the issue could have been, we could have gone back to the policy we just approved and changed that one word there to say, rather than school facilities, school buildings in the last paragraph, as Ms. Warren just about did.
I think the only thing that I think that we missed, though, is we've got new buildings and existing facilities, but we have nothing here for new facilities then.
Again, back to sort of reiteration of our discussion last time. It was the discussion of like, is it a new facility? Is it a new part of an existing facility? It was kind of, we got kind of hung up in the words. This was as close as we could come at the time to not getting too carried away with debating that, and it didn't seem that such an overriding issue. So it was like adding something to an existing facility, then we would have the option to do some naming if we wanted to, like the gymnasium at Kicker, if we wanted to.
And I think I'm sorry to interrupt, the existing facilities includes additions. So I think we have that, it's a new facility within a building, so to speak, or within a building infrastructure.
Right.
So the gymnasium would fall under existing facilities because it's an addition, as an example for Kittredge.
I see your point. I mean, that was part of kind of how we looked at it. I mean, although we have built 2 new additions in the past, I'm going to say 4 years, 5 years, both of which were at Kittredge with the modulars. And then the gym, before that,
It was a new building, the ECC.
it was just a new building. There is a potential for additional classrooms in 2017 that could be added on at any place, really. But it's not something that is
Imminent.
right. Any other discussion? All right, so if there's no additional discussion, all in favor of,
Did you want to amend it for the building purposes, or are you okay with the verbiage as it's described?
I would suggest we keep it the way it is personally. Just, I think it's clearer that way, so.
I wrote it, so I'm biased, so.
Yeah, okay.
I'm okay with it either way, honestly. So all in favor of policy FFR, please signify by saying yes, or aye. Aye. Sorry, any noes? And no abstentions. So we have approved policy FFR as well. All right. Mr. Mealy is not here, but we have second reading, 8C, second reading and approval of the fiscal year revolving accounts as presented. And I know, again, Mrs. Warren, you weren't here, but there really were no increases that were identified within them, and I don't know if you have any additional questions. Okay. All right, so I would entertain a motion to approve the,
Make a motion to approve the revolving accounts as presented in the packet, like FY16 revolving accounts as presented in the packet.
is there a second?
Second.
All right, any discussion?
So there have been no substantive, there actually have been no changes whatsoever since our last review of this.
Not that I know of.
I'm looking at the date, it says
I
April
think
9th.
it says April 9th in there. I'm assuming there's no other changes, Dr. Hutchinson?
No.
Okay. Any additional discussion or question? All right, seeing none, all in favor of approving the fiscal year 16 revolving accounts as presented in the packet, signify by saying aye. Aye. So there are no noes and no abstentions, so 5-0. 8D, the second reading and the approval of the domestic policy domestic violence leave policy, sorry, I scrambled my words there. This is in conjunction with Massachusetts state law, and we discussed it last week. It has to do with the ability for faculty to, once they have exhausted their current leave, to have an additional 15 days. So is there a motion? Would entertain a motion to approve as presented the proposed domestic violence leave policy.
Mr. McDevitt, I'll make a motion to approve the domestic violence leave policy as presented in the packet.
All right.
Seconded?
And second by Mr. Gross. Discussion, Mrs. Warren, you had a question?
Yeah, I just have one question. In number 3, it says an employee seeking such leave shall exhaust all annual or vacation leave. Is the annual just specific to vacation leave or to personal leave and sick leave? Because I guess all I'm wondering is if you accumulate sick days, would it be all the sick days or just your annual allotment of sick days?
I would say it's because it says all annual or vacation, because some staff members, I would say, would have vacation, based upon their contract, it may be classified as vacation, personal, meaning their personal days, and then sick leave.
Okay, so annual is just specific to the vacation?
Just specific to annual, correct, because that doesn't carry over.
Leave. Well, no, because annual or vacation leave, okay.
Comma, personal leave.
But it could, so it's annual leave, and couldn't that then be sick leave?
No, because sick leave can be accumulated.
Okay. I guess I'm just wondering if this is the exact language that we use in the teacher's contract, just that.
This isn't just for teachers.
Okay.
So that's the piece. I mean, if it was just for teachers, we wouldn't put in vacation, because they don't have vacation.
Okay.
Any additional questions? All right. Seeing no additional discussion, if you're in favor of the motion as presented in the packet for the approval of domestic violence leave policy, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. It sounded like there were 5 to nothing, no noes, no abstentions. We will go into 8E, which is a second reading approval of policy JCA, which is the assignment of students to schools. And what this has to do at this point, and just for quick clarification in the packet, there were a number of changes that were put in there. So the first page is actually a draft of it as it kind of looks in its accepted changes. And then as a comparison, you'll see the second page, which is also, of course, JCA, but that is redlined, just to give you a little bit of the historical of kind of how it changed. And then following that in the package are pieces of the attendance that are kind of referenced in there as well, just so that kind of, it's hard to see the whole policy if you're only looking at one piece, so that's kind of why they're there. So, all right. So I would entertain a motion for approval of policy JCA, assignment to students to schools.
I move to approve, as presented, the changes to policy JCA, assignment of students to schools.
Thank you, Mrs. Warren. Is there a second? Second. Thank you, Mr. Limpert. All right, discussion.
So in JC, attendance areas, I would propose that we take out elementary schools, and only because right now, that's the only place where we have to have attendance areas, but we never know going forward if we, say the town were to grow, have a middle school and a high school, whatever, so I don't know that we need that qualifier there. It just makes it.
But we're not voting on that.
Yeah, I think the problem is we're voting on JCA, not JC.
Oh, you're right, sorry, because it was redlined, that's why.
Yeah.
It was there, I think, because it's cross-referenced.
Yeah, it's the cross-reference.
Okay.
That may have been a change that we've already voted on.
Okay. All right, the only other one for JCA is in number 2. I think that the last sentence, priority should be given
to placing siblings at the same school. I think I understand what the intent is there, but I don't think that it's clear as to priority over what, or over, I guess, who. So I would propose that that be removed and left, and the rest of it left as it is. I think the statement could potentially cause more challenge than help. And I think certainly where in any of these cases it has to be requested of the superintendent, I think that they would make the best, make the decisions as best they could for the children in the district and the space that's available. But I think unless that statement is clarified, I don't think that I don't think it's clear.
I think it was the embodiment of what this board was concerned about when we heard the terrible stories of having to be at 3 schools at the same time, and it gives our superintendent the guidance of, I think, what the board is interested in doing, which is keeping the kids at the same school. Priority, I think, is subjective, I agree. But I think it really embodies what our opinion is here, and that is that we really want to keep the kids in the same school.
I totally agree, and I would support that. I think when we say that the priority should be given, is that over if there's open space in that school, that priority is given to the siblings for those additional spaces, or is it priority is given to the siblings before anyone else can be in that grade, in that classroom? I just want to be clear as to what it means, that's all.
I don't think we can draft language that would accommodate every possible
I agree.
situation. I think what it does is it gives our superintendent the guidance of, if you have a conjoint, you can't satisfy both. This is I think the preference.
I think, and we had a quick conversation about this earlier, and I'm not necessarily saying it should be a friendly amendment or modification, but I think what it's trying to say is, if you have an existing family, and we'll just say that it's at Kittredge, for example, and they're already there, and another family comes in, that they wouldn't necessarily have the ability to bump out that family, but it's more kind of new families kind of moving into that school. From my interpretation. So that if you,
yeah.
so, because, I mean, then you'd run the risk of potentially, bumping somebody out who's already been there for a year, 2 years, just because there's a siblings. But I think the goal with this was really for those families who have just moved in, they've bought a house, right on Osgood Street or wherever, and are now going to be a Kittredge neighborhood school, then if there was not space, priority was already given to a student to place them or keep them with a sibling, and that family would be reassigned to Franklin or Thompson or wherever else. So I don't know if that helps make it clearer or not. I think it...
Well, for one who would have to invoke the policy, do you think there's concern over how ambiguous or what the intention is?
Not really. I think that's a really good example, the one you gave. That's pretty clear. Now, for instance, that's maybe the only situation you'd run into, but it's very clear there's more priority over somebody that's already been granted permission, but it's a yearly renewal. That means that if it gets too crowded, you may not be renewed for the coming year. But if there's another student in there who has a sibling in a special program, well, that person's going to be there before the other person. They're going to be given priority, as it says. So there's a couple of instances in which it can be applied. But I agree with you that you can't write it so cleanly that there's not going to be some exceptions. So
is there an appeals process if a family is not satisfied, or does the final decision end with the superintendent?
Final decision ends with the superintendent.
Okay.
And we spend a lot of time really working.
I know. It's always a difficult situation when you have that decision to make. And I guess if we do run into problems where it's unambiguous or it's not being interpreted correctly, we could always revisit the policy.
Absolutely.
I mean, I completely support, of course, I think we want the families to be together. I mean, I think that's important.
I don't think it's clear, and I think there's a potential that it can cause problems because it is unclear. So that's just my opinion.
All right, any additional discussion? All right, seeing none, the motion was to approve policy JCA for assignment of students to schools as presented in the packet. All in favor of the motion as presented, signify by saying aye. All opposed? Okay, so that was 5-0. All right, so moving along, let me catch up to my packet here. 9A, which is the first reading of the Crest amended Articles of Agreement. Again, this requires no action. Mr. Limpert, I know that you mentioned this, I'm going to say either 1 or 2 meetings ago, but this had to do with 2 new districts that wanted to join the collaboration with Crest. And I'm wondering if you could just give us very quickly, I think there's like a year probation. I don't want to use the term probation, but a year, intro year?
It can be up to a year or less. The first step in the process is a district petitions to become a member of the collaborative, and the board, the collaborative board, votes to accept them, but that's a provisional acceptance. Then it has to go back to the districts themselves, who have to vote to accept. There have been 2 districts which have been accepted as provisional members by the Crest Board, of which, of course, we're a member, Dracut and Triton, and will, assuming we all approve, will, at the 1st of July, become full members. The only other change in the collaboration agreement is the addition of a sentence in the agreement to provide a partial reduction in the fees paid by a district once they've been accepted as a provisional member. So when you're accepted as a full member of the collaborative, you pay about 20% less than you would pay if you're not a member. And if you're accepted as a provisional member from the time you're accepted until the time you become a full member, you get a 10% reduction. That's a one-liner in there. So those are the 3 changes in the document that we need to vote on, and other than that, there's no other changes. So it's 1 sentence and the addition of 2 districts. It seems like a cumbersome process to add districts, but
Right.
I think they were thinking it maybe doesn't happen too often. But
Well, it is kind of funny that you say that, because I don't remember if it was October, November, at some point in the fall, we voted that there were 2 districts who didn't send anybody, and they were actually removed from that. So, I mean, it's funny that we've gone through this process twice in 8 months.
Turned out, kind of an interesting footnote to this, Triton had withdrawn from the collaborative a few years ago because they thought it was being so poorly managed. Now they went back in because it's being so well managed.
Okay.
Just saying.
Mr. Lippert, is there any pressing reason to have this reviewed today?
I don't believe there is. I think if we could get to it at our next meeting, that would be fine. So I think we're good.
Great. Thank you.
Any additional questions or anything that the board might need for that?
No, thank you, Mr. Limpert, for continuing to represent us.
Yeah, and I can't say it often enough. With the new management for this collaborative, it's just an excellently run organization. I think they deserve all the support we can give them.
All right, we have done 9B, so we will jump to 9C, which is the first reading. I'm sorry?
Question. There was a couple other, I know the high school principal covered a couple of these, I think 3 of them. There was a couple others in here, in my packet at least, that we didn't go over. I don't know if there was any of the background on. There's one, it was ironic that Ms. Rucker was here, but we didn't talk about this German one, or the, there's a French one here.
Okay. So
Are those all under the same guidance as the?
Yeah, they are actually, and
On
I
the
think
G.
I think the reason that she called out Spain specifically was because they normally go in April, and now they're moving that to February, and then collaborative trip, or the inspirational trip, I'm sorry, is a brand-new trip. So the others are ones that we have
Going on for
done
almost
for,
decades.
yeah,
Those are no
forever.
changes to those.
To those
Yeah.
ones?
Yeah.
Okay, I just haven't, obviously I've never.
No, that's fine. Good question.
Yeah.
Shakespeare, I think, is going on
Shakespeare,
25
she-
years.
She mentioned Shakespeare, and the other ones she didn't mention.
Right.
Yep.
And these are standard, they've been going on for years, no change from them at all?
No. Just prices go up, that's it.
Yeah, yeah.
German trip is 20.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Great relationship with Alter.
Yep.
Excellent.
Okay.
Okay. All right, thank you. We'll go on to 9C, first reading of the student handbooks. So I think that this actually came in two different sections. So if it would be easier, I think with the packet, we have the high school. Look at the high school one first.
Can I, okay.
Okay, please. I was just going to say, I mean, every year we go through this. Every year it's burdensome to look at 80 to 200 pages of text. What we really need is what's substantively different, if anything, both in the presentation or in the structure. So that would be my request, and I think that's where you're going.
Thanks, it was. They are rather lengthy, et cetera. Based on the policy and our understanding of the policy, we've always emphasized that, one, the main purpose of doing this, especially as mandated by state law, is that any handbook for grades 9 to 12, the school committee has to approve the conduct, the code of conduct. Now, the student handbook is much more than the code of conduct, as we know, but the policy also covers concerns regarding the presentation, et cetera. We also know that at this time of year, it's pretty tough to do a lot of finalization of any changes. There's a lot of updating involved. We made some major updates a year or two ago based on law revisions, et cetera. For instance, bullying one was updated. We put all of those through legal every year, and they simply advise us, you need to upgrade these. There were really, I don't believe, any really major changes this year. The elementary one, by the way, just to stop there, is if you have, the way we've always worked it is if you have any suggestions, observations, we understand that at this point in time there's going to be a little mistakes here and there. Please send them to the office so we can pass them along to the principals to address. I would like to think that they get better every year. One of the things that we've done, as you can see, what Joan did in the middle school one was simply a yellow line any changes, and there's not many. Yeah. Right. The elementary one that I wasn't sure if Bev had forwarded it, so I sent it also when I got back to the office later this afternoon. The effort we're making with elementary is that it's a generic elementary handbook / code of conduct in there, so that it's going to cover all the schools. There were two principals that took the lead in this. Greg Landry and Joe Clark took the lead in this. They actually just finished it up this afternoon in the draft form, because as you can see, it's a lot of work, especially to get everybody on the same page. So I believe they're meeting tomorrow as an elementary group to take any questions and answers amongst themselves. So, and then anything that's particular to a school is not the handbook or the code of conduct, but it's just information that might be particular to a school that would be on an individual website of the school. This one would be on all websites, the same one, showing that all the elementary is consistent in following certain procedures. So, and they put a lot of thought and work into that, yet by their own admission, they realize that was the first run, and therefore there's plenty of, there's probably mistakes here and there. But as you know, it's they're pretty lengthy. Yeah. And the reason is we want to cover all the laws and additions to the laws that get put on us every year. So.
So one question that I guess I have on this, it mentions specifically the foreign exchange program, which is, at least in the packet, it's on page 118.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know if we need to add or include anything that's in there, because we will have students coming. In the packet, it's 100 page 8. 100. Let me see if I can find the page on it here.
That's okay. That's all right.
Hold on. Sorry. I know what you're doing now. It looks like page 39. I just don't know if we need to have anything in there because we'll have international students conceivably attending through the China program.
We can do that easily.
I don't know if we need it. I don't. We specifically talk about our students who.
Oh, this is, okay, okay. That is specific to our students who are going on an exchange, not about students that we've accepted on exchange.
Okay.
Let me check on that,
It's
though.
regarding the residents, but that's really the biggest student change, perhaps, that we've got looming.
I'll make a note of that and we'll check.
Okay. And it may actually be helpful for family. I don't know if, I can't remember, Cambridge Initiative or if that's the correct name of that. They may have some recommendations in terms of, and it could just be part of an information package that those families receive regarding how to contact the school or the agency. But that may be something we want to just check on.
So I'm going to plead stupidity right up front. I've been sitting through this same conversation once a year for a few years now, and every time we have it, when you say, our legal responsibility is to approve the code of conduct, and I look at the table of contents, I'm trying to figure out which of these sections that represents. Can you help us?
That's a great question.
I'm assuming it's more than one.
Because in the index, it doesn't say code of conduct.
Yeah, exactly.
Typically, it'll say reference, forget that, what I was going to say.
Student conduct and discipline question?
Student conduct and discipline.
Would that be that section?
Yes, it would be.
Okay.
And it's not page 21, as you will find out, because
the pagination's not done.
The pagination's not done yet.
Yeah, I get it. Okay. Because, there are other things that could appear to be code of conduct-like things, but aren't, I assume.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty in there that
chemical
aren't.
health and
sure.
stuff like that.
But again, if you have any questions on any of that, don't hesitate to send it forth, and we can have those answers next time.
Okey-doke. We're good.
All right. Any other? All right.
By the way, just say, send it to Bev, and then Bev would be able to keep the record, and then she'll pass along to any individual principals too.
Right.
All right. 9D is our next one, and this is policy GCBB, and this has to do with the employment of principals. And so I wanted to put this on the agenda for some discussion. Mr. Teresi brought this to our attention earlier, having to do with basically the fact that we have not been following this, and so we wanted to have a conversation about that. So I don't know if Mr. Teresi, if you want to.
Thank you, Mr. McDevitt, for putting it on the agenda. I don't know if the board remembers, I brought this up tangentially when we were talking about Dr. Price's contract. And it's a policy that it's obviously on our books, and my guess is it's probably on most school committee books across the state if it's referenced here. Obviously, the superintendent has the ability to hire and fire principals, but this and for the edification of people watching at home, basically this policy says that all contracts shall be submitted to the school committee for their approval for all the terms concerning compensation and benefits. Now, that hasn't been done for some time, whether it's just an omission or whatever. But I guess the first question that I think, I'd like to raise, like, do we want to keep this policy on the books? I do. I think it's an important oversight that we have over the superintendent. There are some things that I believe maybe we could add to it to make it better, but I asked Mr. McDevitt to put it on the agenda so we could talk about it. And also, as an overarching issue, what does it do to the current contracts we have right now? We obviously have contracts with 7 different principals. Is this worth exploring with legal counsel whether these contracts are indeed valid? And those are my initial thoughts, and I'd welcome a conversation about that going forward.
So I think the first thing that I would say is, I actually like the policy. I think that, as you mentioned, there's, I don't want to say oversight, but there's approval, kind of a little bit of what's happening there. The policy, we're not, with Massachusetts ed reform, we can't control who the person is, but we are financially responsible for what that contract is and the kind of, I guess, commitment that the town and the school department makes to the individuals that are there. So I do think there's probably some cleanup that we need to do on this.
I'd also be the first one to admit in my 8 years here, it's never been done.
Right.
That was my sense from talking to not only members of this board, but other previous members. So one issue that arose, looking at the contracts that we have right now, the personnel notwithstanding, but there is one contract that is a 5-year contract, not a typical 3-year contract. Now, I understand that Mass General Law allows contracts between the year 3 and 5 years. I don't question that. I question whether, as a policy, we want to have 5-year contracts. And again, not getting personalities involved here, but I think sometimes having a contract of that length can, and again, just the circumstances here, could hamstring a. I believe when you bring a new leader on board, you should have the ability to pick your own team, so to speak. Recently, last December, obviously, there was some controversy when the new governor came in, and there were a lot of last-minute appointments done by the former Governor Patrick, and I think that raised some hackles. And I think that the same kind of principle is involved here, Principal Ellie, not AL. We have a new superintendent coming on board. Obviously, we give a contract issue some stability, but it would be my sentiment that we should not be giving out more than 3-year contracts. And I know Mass General Law says that you can give up to a 5-year contract, but it would be my position that we shouldn't do that, and maybe we could put that into the policy. And I'm willing to, obviously discuss that with the fellow board members.
So if we were to do that or include that, can I take a stab at just saying perhaps that third paragraph, which is really a sentence, but the length of second and subsequent contracts of employment for principals shall be in accordance with state law, but not to exceed 3 years?
Well, state law obviously says the superintendent can give. There's the whole difference between what should be done and what can be done, and what can be done is obviously, the superintendent gave out a 5-year contract. He was in his right to offer that. Whether or not, if it was brought to the school committee, we would have accepted it is another question altogether.
I think that's the key issue, if I could. I am fine with the policy as it's written, but we should be enforcing it. So the conversation about should, the principal receive a 3, 4, 5-year contract would have been had. So I don't think there's anything wrong with ensuring the longevity if we feel we have a superstar that we want to keep as part of, the programming here. But I think we need to have the conversation.
I would just also add to that there would have to be language referencing that in here, because if I were to read, my interpretation of this would be you bring forth what the compensation level is, but you don't have to bring forth what the length of the contract is. So that would have to be some language that would be
So all terms
in there.
concerning compensation benefits.
Well, I'm not suggesting we
Right.
start wordsmithing
Yeah.
right now. I
Right,
brought this
no,
up
no,
for
right,
discussion
right,
purposes.
yeah.
I agree with the superintendent. The term of contract is that compensation / benefits. You know, I mean, any lawyer can make an argument whether or not that is or not, but I don't know. It's my position that I don't think we should be going up 5-year contracts. I'm going to bring this up just because two other town officials emailed me or called me in the last few days. But we pass an article every single year at town meeting, Article 3, that authorizes the town manager or superintendent of schools regarding contracts in excess of 3 years. And I think it's not directly related to this specific issue, but I think it's something that is in the minds of the voters, of the people, well, at least the people that attend town meeting, all 300 of them, that anything larger than 3 years, we should really be scrutinizing really closely. And so that's why I think it's important that we try to memorialize that sentiment into a policy. And that's my position.
Let me just pick up on one of your earlier comments, Mr. Tracy. I think part of the issue here has been that we have not been using this policy, applying this policy. So when a new contract was to be exercised by the superintendent, if he presented it to us first, we could have that discussion. We haven't been able to do that because it hasn't happened. So I would say that's step one, which you've sort of identified for us, which is a good starting point. Beyond that, then, we could think about some changing in the wording here and decide if that's what we want to be doing. But I think, I think you've kind of identified for us the first important step, which is to use the policy, to exercise the policy on every occasion and say, okay, what's the contract look like? What are we doing here?
Could I make a suggestion? Since you are.
You're the chairman, you can do whatever you want. You have the gavel.
I barely use it, except to open and close. For a subsequent meeting, is it worthwhile for you to kind of draft? I mean, I think what you're hearing from everybody on the board, and I'm not trying to or put words in anyone's mouth, is that, I think we're supportive of kind of that 3-year kind of, unless there's special approval or, something like that. I don't know what it's going to kind of come out as a final document, but did you want to take a stab at modifying GCBB?
I'd be happy to.
Okay.
And one other issue that it was kind of almost brought up when we were talking about replacing the Thompson School principal. Obviously, under the current law and the current policy, the superintendent tomorrow could hire somebody. He is to his credit, he is obviously soliciting Dr. Price's opinion on it. I'd like to kind of memorialize that going forward as well, that if we have a superintendent who is, and I'll draft something, we can, beat the heck out of it later on, but I'd like to include something along the lines of if a superintendent has offered his resignation, that we should be, well, I'll work on some language like that, but there should be some, we shouldn't be, I don't think, again, it's personalities notwithstanding, I don't think that if a superintendent is leaving the district, he should be giving out contracts without proper, either the school committee chair or the next superintendent, if there's a next superintendent chosen, being informed and having their consent as well. Even though the law, I mean, up till June 30th, he can do, whatever he wants to.
Right.
So.
But the policy says we would have a discussion about that.
Right.
On the compensation and benefits, right?
That's the contract.
Right.
And I think, you bring up an interesting point. We are leaving, obviously as you're retiring, we're leaving on very amicable terms, right? So, I mean, like, if you were leaving and this was not a good ending, you seriously could hire somebody who, and not involve Dr. Price, or, hire somebody who is not the best fit for that. So I think we've got a good situation where we're working that through. I can easily see a pretty negative one.
That does happen. That does happen.
The only thing I'd add.
So I've heard.
The only thing I'd add is, I think we have strong parents in this community, strong teachers in this community, and the process that's been tried and true, although principal turnover all over the state does happen, is, there are committed people that get together and, screen the applicants, move the applicants on. In the end, it's a small pool going forward as finalists that certainly may be appointed by the superintendent. But I just wanted to point that part out about the involvement in the principal process. I think that's important just to mention.
Parents at Needham might have a different opinion right now.
Two comments about that. First is, I think, maybe we want to use your word, memorialize some of the concepts here, but I think what you're doing, Dr. Edmondson, right now, engaging Dr. Price in the process, both with our new humanities curriculum coordinator and with the new principal, is, I think, the spirit of what you're saying, Mr. Trucy. So I think that's appropriate. However, having said that, it's now started to fade into the past, but we had at least one superintendent in our own memory who might have autocratically done who knows what, hired and fired people just because didn't like the color of their tie or their whatever they were wearing that. So, this is the protection for everyone, is to have some of this written down to say, no, you have to at least come and talk to us before you do something precipitous. So I'm all in favor of all of that. So I think that's all good stuff.
So I appreciate you bringing this up, Mr. Tracy, and I think the only thing that came to my mind was, I agree with the spirit of having it be a collaborative effort, particularly when there's a change of guard. But I also think that we also need to be a bit wary of, we don't want to be in a stalled pattern either, unintentionally. For example, with Thompson needing a new principal, I do appreciate the fact that we are trying to move forward and potentially finding a good candidate, as opposed to going into a holding pattern for a full year before that process starts. So I don't know, having some sort of flexibility in that type of process, I think, is important.
Thank you. I think when you draft a policy, and I will take a crack at this. It's not a hard and fast law that needs to be. So I think as we did in the last policy, I think part of its guideline, it's policy, but it'll memorialize the fact that the superintendent that is exiting the district should consult or must consult. We can wordsmith it later, but there will be some kind of recognition that process should happen.
And, rather than law, it's guidance, right? So our thinking on the process just put down on paper. So I'm all good with that.
And the other thing, just as you start to draft that and think about options, we have 2 assistant superintendents as well. So, if there's a, we may not have somebody, maybe an intern, who's kind of coming in, and so, that's just kind of a.
So I went to look for this. So in the law, MGL says that we have the sort of right of refusal on assistant or associate superintendents. Right? The superintendent presents we have the right of refusal for an assistant or associate superintendent. The superintendent comes to us and makes a recommendation for someone they'd like to hire, and we do have the right of refusal for that person in that job. I also believe that's true of the special education director. I could not find the language, but I believe those positions at that level are other jobs that we have some oversight for. And at some point we want to make sure it's somewhere in our policy that we can find it when we need it. I couldn't. So anyway.
I can tell you that in the past we have come forward with those positions.
Yes. Yeah. No. Right. I'm just saying.
Yeah. So
I remember you guys did it.
Yeah, the MGL reference here, Chapter 7141, it says there that the school committee may award contract to superintendent of schools or school business administrator. So I think what you're talking about
Yep.
is more than that, so you're right, it's not here yet.
I think our policy doesn't necessarily include anything that's in there, so. Okay, all right, thank you, Mr. Tracy. I think we might be here for a while for public comment.
Before we leave that topic, there was one other item that he brought up, which was, do we need to seek legal counsel advice on what to do that the policy has not been executed? I would ask that the chair engage legal counsel for an opinion on that.
Okay. All right. All right, perfect. So,
Is it,
go ahead.
is it possible for us to get, and maybe we got this last week, but an update on the budget and where we stand?
Yeah, we got that last week.
Yeah.
It's still not pretty.
We'll get
So-
one for next week as well, or
Not much
2
different,
weeks.
but it's not much prettier.
So as we barrel down on June 30th, what does that mean?
What do you mean? We met with the town manager, as we do every week, last week, and Lynn Savage as well, town treasurer. And Lynn is working very closely with Jim's office at this time to try to solidify what the actual numbers will be, because that will have to be presented at town meeting. So that's what they're working on.
So if I could, it looks like we're still heading for a deficit of
absolutely.
$300,000 plus.
Yep.
And that would have to be part of the warrant to move monies from free
Yep.
cash or alternative
Absolutely.
into the school budget to close that. And there's still the separate warrant article that would create the special ed contingency fund.
Right.
And fund it, so that we don't get faced with these issues out of our
In the
operating.
future.
In the future, right.
Thank you.
Before we adjourn, any comments from the committee?
We took the stonemasons took the first course of stones up the back of the Bradstreet School, so we made some progress on that before the building gets torn down. So we hope to have those all off soon and stored until the administration building is complete, and then to then take the next step to figure out what a monument would look like and start to construct it in an appropriate location. So we're making some progress there. They're not going into the giant dumpster, right? So that's a good thing.
Mr. Teresi? Mr. Gross? Mrs. Warren?
Well, I know it's been said, but thank you to all the teachers, paraprofessional support staff, everyone who does, who comes to work every day and works with our children and helps them achieve, and with a smile on their face. I think, again, we appreciate it. Thank you. The breakfasts and snacks are wonderful, but they can't say enough about how much we appreciate the work that all of you do, so thank you.
I actually have two quick things. One of the fun things that I get to do as chair, and I probably should have said this in my chair report, is I'll be meeting on Friday with Mark DeSalvo, the moderator, and other members of the board, Bill Callahan from...
Preface that again?
What is it?
How did you preface that? One of the most enjoyable parts you did?
Yes, it is, it is.
No, I just want to make sure I got that right.
Chairman of the Board of Selectmen, Dick Valancourt, and Bill Callahan from the FinCom. And we will actually do a taping of a kind of intro to town meeting that, so we'll do that on Friday, I think at like 10 or something in the morning at the high school. And then that will be aired in preparation for people to view coming up on the or town meeting, which I think is the 18th or something this year. 19th, thank you. And the last thing is we are, and sometimes Mr. Amelia kind of gives a little bit of the building update, but on June 16th, from 6 to 8, we have the open house for the school department administration building. And so we will have that, and that will be a time where the building is open to the public for people to come and kind of casually just kind of walk through and see the work that has been chained off for so many months at this point, and the resurrection of that intersection there. And I think the first meeting that, or the next meeting that we have after that may possibly be actually in the building itself. The 18th. So that's just a couple days later, which is kind of rolling down the road.
Mr. McGibbon, has Dr. Price been invited to that open house?
Yes.
She has been invited to the open house. I don't remember off the top, there may have been a conflict with something at Newton High, and they're kind of ending up, but I will double check on that. I know she has been invited, though, so. All right. I would now entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
So by Mr. Gross and by Mrs. Warren, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? We are done.